In the middle of the 1980s, Subaru did something unexpected. They built a car that looked like it had been designed by a team of airplane engineers who had just watched a science fiction movie. It had a pointy nose, pop-up headlights, one giant windshield wiper, and doors so smooth they looked like a spaceship. This was not your usual Japanese coupe. This was the Subaru XT, and later the Subaru XT6. And while it never sold in huge numbers, it had some strange tricks under the hood, and even stranger ones inside the car. The Subaru XT first appeared in the United States in February 1985. In Japan, it was called the Subaru Alcyone and arrived a few months later in June. Australia and New Zealand called it the Subaru Vortex. Subaru built it at the Yajima plant in Gunma, Japan, and aimed it mostly at the American market. The goal was to create a car that looked modern, handled well, and could show off what Subaru engineers could do if you gave them a weird idea and let them run with it. The base XT came with a 1.8-liter EA82 flat-4 engine. It made around 97 horsepower in normal form and up to 115 horsepower in the turbo version. Subaru even made some versions with up to 134 horsepower, but only for certain markets. Buyers could pick either a 5-speed manual or a 3-speed or 4-speed automatic. Some had front-wheel drive, while others had part-time 4-wheel drive. Turbo models had digital dashboards and a trip computer. Some even came with a height-adjustable air suspension system. But in 1987, things got more interesting. Subaru added the XT6. This version had a 2.7-liter ER27 flat-6 engine. It made 145 horsepower and 156 pound-feet of torque. Subaru only used this engine in the XT6, which made it rare. The XT6 came with either a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed automatic, and this time, the all-wheel drive was full-time. There were no belts driving the power steering. Instead, it used a system called Cybrid, which was fully electric and speed-sensitive. It worked fine most of the time, but it could be expensive if it failed. The design of the car came from people like Tetsuya Hayashi, Kiyoshi Sugimoto, and Hiroshi Yako. They focused on aerodynamics. The car had a very low drag coefficient, about 0.29 to 0.31, depending on the version. Every detail from the door handles to the rubber spoilers helped cut through air. Inside, the dashboard tilted with the steering wheel. The climate and radio controls sat on little pods, like something from a jet cockpit. Production stopped in 1991. Only around 98,918 units were made worldwide. Japan only got about 8,170 of those. In the United States, the XT Turbo was once given to the Super Bowl 22nd most valuable player. A year later, the XT6 was handed to the Super Bowl 23rd winner. Subaru even made a few rare convertible versions in Japan, like the Junko Shimada and Fitzy editions, but those were made in very tiny numbers. The Subaru XT and XT6 were not bestsellers, but they were test beds for new ideas. Their flat engines, all-wheel drive systems, and futuristic dashboards helped shape what came later. Without the XT6, there might not have been a Subaru SVX, and without that, Subaru might have just stayed the brand that made wagons. In the late 1980s, a strange-looking sports car quietly rolled out of a small British factory. It looked fast, sounded serious, and had a name most people had never heard before, Panther Solo 2. This car was not built by one of the big companies. It came from Panther Car Company, a small manufacturer known more for its retro-styled cars than high-tech performance machines. What made the Solo 2 interesting was not just its shape, but the story behind it. One full of quick changes, big ambitions, and a few engineering problems nobody really expected. The story began back in 1984 when Panther launched the first version, the Panther Solo one. It was a small, mid-engined, rear-wheel drive car that used a 1.6-liter Ford CVH engine. That was the same type of engine you could find in an ordinary Ford Escort. But that same year, Toyota came out with the MR2, which made the Solo one look old-fashioned almost instantly. Panther's owner, young Chul Kim, was not happy. He wanted something better. So, the company began work on a completely new version, the Panther Solo 2. To design it, Panther hired Ken Greenlee, who was also known for his work on other British cars. He came up with a modern 2+2 coupe that looked aerodynamic and had sharp lines. It was longer and wider than the first Solo and had space for 4 people, if the 2 in the back were small enough. The Solo 2 made its public debut at the 1987 Frankfurt Motor Show, and it definitely got attention. Underneath the body, the Solo 2 was a lot more advanced than people expected. It used a 2.0-liter turbocharged engine from the Ford's Sierra RS Cosworth, producing about 204 horsepower and 200 pound-feet of torque. It had a Borg-Warner T5 5-speed manual transmission, and more importantly, it had full-time 4-wheel drive, using a custom-built chain-driven transfer box. The car could reach 144 miles per hour and go from 0 to 60 in about 6.8 seconds. Not bad for something that weighed around 2,954 pounds. The structure was a mix of advanced materials. The frame was a steel space frame, the top part used aluminum honeycomb, and the body panels were made from carbon fiber and Kevlar. That made the car strong, but it also made it hard to build. Some panels did not cure properly, and there were problems with how the paint stuck. On top of that, the custom 4-wheel drive system had reliability issues, especially under pressure. By the time Panther was bought by SsangYong, a company based in South Korea, the project was already in trouble. Production moved to a different facility, but things did not improve. Only around 13 to 25 cars were ever built between 1989 and 1991. Most of them were sold in the United Kingdom. And today, only a few are still known to exist. The Panther Solo 2 was a bold idea that came from a small company trying to punch above its weight. It never became a hit, but it showed that even the smallest car makers could dream big, even if the results were not perfect. In the early 1990s, while the automotive world was busy admiring the Dodge Viper and dreaming about Japanese sports cars, something strange was hiding inside General Motors. It was a Corvette, but not just any Corvette. It had a nose that looked a bit longer, a hood that seemed like it was stretched by a mad scientist, and an engine so big that it barely fit inside. This was the 1990 Chevrolet Corvette ZR12, also known by the nickname Conan. It never made it to the showroom, but it did something more important. It asked the question, what if we gave a Corvette 12 cylinders and watched what happened? The ZR12 was built as an engineering mule, not as a production car. That means it was made for testing, not for selling. The idea was to create a Corvette that could fight the Dodge Viper head-on. At that time, the Dodge Viper was still getting ready for its big debut. It had a massive V10 engine, and Chevrolet wanted to know if their Corvette platform could handle something even more extreme. To do this, Chevrolet turned to a company called Ryan Falconer Industries. Ryan Falconer had been building racing engines, marine engines, and even aircraft engines. For the ZR12, Falconer built a huge V12 engine. It was made of aluminum and was based on small block Chevrolet engine designs. This engine was not just long, it was nearly 9 inches longer than a regular V8. It made around 700 horsepower and 750 pound-feet of torque. That is a lot of power, especially for a car from 1990. But fitting the Falconer V12 into the Corvette was not simple. The C4 Corvette chassis had to be stretched by about 8 inches just to fit the engine. This made the car look longer, and it changed the balance of the whole vehicle. Still, the engineers managed to keep the extra weight down. The car only gained about 100 pounds thanks to the aluminum construction of the engine. Even though the car had all this power, it never raced or made it to the streets. It was just one prototype. The ZR12 stayed in General Motors testing facilities, and later it was shown at the National Corvette Museum. People who saw it in person were often surprised. Many did not even know a 12-cylinder Corvette ever existed. The 1990 Corvette ZR12 Conan was not built to win trophies or break sales records. It was built to explore the edge of what was possible. It might not have been pretty, and it was never fast around a racetrack, but it still lives on as one of the weirdest questions Chevrolet ever asked. What if we took a Corvette and gave it a V12? In the early 1980s, if you were in Europe and needed a family sedan, you had hundreds of choices. But what if you also wanted it to go fast, quietly? Something that looked like a schoolteacher's car but could secretly outrun sports cars. That is where the Pujo 505 Turbo S crept in. It looked calm. It was not. The Pujo 505 was first introduced in 1979 as the successor to the popular Pujo 504. It came from France and was built to be solid, rear-wheel drive, and easy to live with. It had a McPherson strut front suspension, independent rear suspension, and rack and pinion steering. It was designed to be practical and reliable. Then, in late 1982, someone at Pujo decided that maybe this calm car needed a wild side. That is when the Pujo 505 turbo injection came alive. Pujo used a 2.2-liter turbocharged engine called the N9T, which was originally a Simca Chrysler design. They chose it because it was strong. Porsche even helped fine-tune it. The engine had forged steel parts, sodium-filled exhaust valves, and a Bosch L-Getronic fuel injection system. It also had a Garrett T3 turbocharger. In 1983, the engine made 150 horsepower. That may not sound like much now, but it was quick for a family car back then. Then came the updates. In 1984, Pujo added an intercooler and changed the name to N9TE that pushed power up to 160 horsepower. The car kept its 5-speed manual transmission, though some markets also got 3-speed or 4-speed automatics. In 1986, they raised the power again. This time, it became 180 horsepower with the N9T version. This one had more boost and better engine management. The top speed reached around 210 kilometers per hour. The chassis was tuned by Danielson, a French motorsports group. They made the suspension stiffer, widened the track, and added a limited slip differential. The car now had performance to match its name. Still, it looked pretty normal, unless you noticed the front spoiler, the two-tone paint, and the unique alloy wheels. Those wheels looked a lot like ones used on the Pujo 604 STI and the 504 V6. The Pujo 505 Turbo S name was mostly used in the United States around 1988. In America, the Turbo S came as both a sedan and a wagon. The wagon was especially rare and only sold in North America. It had the same turbo engine, but sometimes came with less power, depending on the year. The US versions had thicker bumpers, sealed beam headlights, and sometimes included air conditioning or an automatic transmission. Pujo stopped selling cars in the United States by 1991. By then, the 505 Turbo S had become one of the last fast, rear-wheel drive sedans from Pujo. There were even racing versions of the 505 Turbo that made up to 550 horsepower for super production racing. Today, it is a forgotten car, but once it was the fastest sleeper on the block, and it did it with a French accent. In the mid-1960s, a small, strange-looking sports car rolled into the London Racing Car Show. Most people didn't know what it was, and many probably walked right past it. But that little car, sitting low and wide like it had something to prove, was different. It looked like a toy made for racing, yet it wasn't built by any big company. It came from a tiny British firm. This was the 1966 Unipower GT, a car almost no one remembers, but one that tried to pack sports car dreams into something smaller than a Volkswagen Beetle. The Unipower GT started with two men, Ernie Unger, a racing car engineer, and Val Derbryan, a businessman. They wanted to build a sports car that was light, simple, and affordable. They also wanted it to be mid-engined, which was rare outside of racetracks back then. The design work was done by Ron Bradshaw, who had also worked on the famous Ford GT40. With that kind of experience, the Unipower ended up looking like a downsized supercar. Some people even called it a mini Miura. The car was built using a steel tubular space frame made by Arch Motors with a fiberglass body bolted on top. That body was produced by Specialized Moldings, while the trim and interior were done by Wood and Pickett, a coach builder known for customizing cars for celebrities. It had independent suspension all around, coilover dampers, and a unique braking system with twin master cylinders and a bias bar. Under the fiberglass shell, The Unipower GT used engines from the British Motor Corporation. The basic version had a 998 cubic centimeter engine from the Mini Cooper, producing around 55 horsepower. The more powerful version used a 1275 cubic centimeter Cooper S engine, making about 75 horsepower. A few models even had the rare Jackknight 5-speed gearbox, though most had a standard 4-speed manual. The engine sat transversely behind the seats, sending power to the rear wheels. Performance was surprisingly good for such a small car. The Unipower GT could reach around 115 miles per hour and did 0 to 60 in under 10 seconds, but what really mattered was the way it handled. Thanks to its mid-engine layout and lightweight, around 1,120 to 1,260 pounds, it was nimble and well-balanced. Production started in 1966 by Universal Power Drives Limited, or UPD. In 1968, the rights were transferred to UWF Automotive Engineering, who continued building the car until 1970. In total, only 73 cars were made, 49 right-hand drive and 24 left-hand drive. A handful were built for racing, including one called Chassis UWF 1007, which went to Le Mans in 1969. It was bright yellow, and the French nicknamed it La Puce Jaune, or the Yellow Flea. Though it didn't qualify, it still raced at Mugello and later got a Cosworth FVA engine. One of these rare cars ended up with Tim Carpenter, an engineer who found the very first Unipower GT in 1982. He restored it over 2 years, upgraded the engine to a 1398 cubic centimeter version, and used it both on road and track. The Unipower GT never became a success, but it was clever, unusual, and brave. It tried to bring race car design to everyday drivers. It did not have big power, but it had big ideas. Today, the few that survive are reminders of a time when small companies still dared to think differently.